pleaser? Do you struggle with the disease to please? Why do some of us feel so compelled to say yes when we want to say no? When we say yes to things we really don't want to do, we get overcommitted. We can actually feel resentment and become passive aggressive. Why do we do that? Well, it's believed oftentimes it forms when we're younger. We realize that when we say yes and do things for people, we get a positive response, and we can sort of get addicted to that attention. But does it really matter? Is it any big deal? Dr. Harriet Breaker says yes, it is a big deal. She says it's not some benign little thing of us being overly nice. She says that it's actually quite destructive. And she identifies that there's a disease to please triangle. It involves our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. And she says we can address those and make some positive changes, even some small changes, and they can have dramatic positive effects. And I actually did that on my own. I now realize that that is what I did on my own. I began to say no. So how do you begin to say no if you're a people pleaser? Here's a few ideas. So you look at your calendar and you realize there's a lot of things that you've made commitments to on your calendar that you wish you would have said no to. It's probably a good idea to try to make some changes. One thing that helped me was to identify and recognize what my priorities were in life and what my passions were. If you can identify what your passions and priorities are clearly, it gives you an idea of how you can pack those in to the time you have. We all have obligations that have to be done daily. That can involve family, housework, a job, all kinds of commitments. But what we want to do is very carefully say yes to what we really want to put our heart into. So identifying your passions and interests and following those is wise. Also, in working in that direction, I realized that I never learned any boundaries. I never realized that I could lay boundaries. And once I laid that framework, I could try to work within that. Saying yes to one or two things meant I was not going to be doing something else, because to pursue the things I had made a commitment to, I wanted to do them well. And we only have so much time. So if you're trying to go forward with making changes, identify those passions, those priorities, and begin to set some boundaries. When you identify what you want to be doing and you lay out some boundaries, you're beginning to put yourself as a priority. And although you're moving in a really good direction, it doesn't always feel good right away, because Dr. Breaker says we have an uncontrollable need for approval, almost an addiction. But we have to recognize that that need for approval is elusive. We are just seeking something that feels good at the moment. And sometimes we're trying to avoid somebody's anger or confrontation. Recognizing that that's part of the new plan will help you stick to your guns and say yes to the things you really want to. Remember, when you say no to one thing, you're saying yes to something else. And maybe if you make that switch in your mind, it will help you to feel like you have more control over your decision making. Also, it helped me to realize that there were many other people that I saw that didn't have trouble saying no. So when you decide that you're a priority, realize that when you're asked to do something, you don't have to answer right away. You can say, I want to think that decision over before you make a commitment. Now, if somebody asks you to do something and you realize right away, I've got enough on my plate, or I don't have interest in doing that, it's very wise to make your no answer very deliberate. Don't be wishy-washy. When people see that you are vacillating back and forth between yes and no, and they might be able to convince you, they may make those efforts. Because oftentimes people have a slot to fill, and they're also just trying hard to accomplish a goal. There will always be needs around you. And if you find yourself with extra time, you can begin to say yes to those things that you really want to, instead of getting overcommitted and sucked into something you really don't want to be doing. It's empowering to realize you have the ability to say no, and you don't owe anybody an explanation. You're doing a great job. Keep it up, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.